What you are seeing here, dear viewer, is the result of severe interstellar stupidity. This man's nervous system has been hacked, his body mutilated, and his genetic code has been corrupted. And this is the result for all life that encounters the flood from Halo. This is Mike, and after resigning from his job hunting for valuable space junk for the company, he has enlisted himself in the UNSC Marine Corps. Now he must serve and protect his fellow humans, fight off the Covenant threat, and wipe out the Flood Plague. But while Mike tries his best to break the Warthog airtime record and gingerly asks Cortana if she's up for some personal VR time, let's provide some basic context on the Flood for those unfamiliar with the lore. But first, a word from today's sponsor.
Violence, gore, action, sci-fi, Storyverse has it all. Storyverse is a brand spanking new entertainment app that features tons of freshly authored fantasy tales that shake up the format by blending traditional writing with narration and animation. The talented authors and writers from around the world have come together to create tales such as a post-apocalyptic version of the Little Red Riding Hood where the wolf is fucking decapitated, or a dystopian society where crying is punishable by a bullet to the head. All these mature subjects come with custom animations in a variety of 2D and 3D styles and their own narrated sections to keep you engaged. A fresh, multi-sensory adventure is just a swipe away. Go and check out some of these grisly stories for yourself by downloading the free app on the App Store and Google Play today. And while you're at it, why not follow Storyverse's socials for story teasers and behind-the-scenes content?
So there were once these smart cookies called the Precursors knocking about. They could shapeshift at will and could control all of time and space pretty much. They were in charge of our galaxy and tasked themselves with protecting all life so that it should never go extinct. Before long, another bunch of smart cookies called the Forerunners came on the scene and said, "We are your successors." The Precursors said yes, but then said, "Actually, nah, humans are our successors." By the way, in this universe at this time, humans are super smart interstellar beings, not the self-interested devolved organisms we are today. The Forerunners were pissed and went to war with the Precursors. The Precursors got fucked up big time in a very one-sided, almost genocidal attack. The few remaining survivors ran away to the edge of the galaxy and shapeshifted themselves into dust. Their goal was to regenerate into their old selves and make a comeback once the dust had settled. The millennia ticked by with the Forerunners controlling the galaxy and the Precursor dust gradually corrupting and mutating into something awful, the Flood. The Flood is basically the corrupted genetic material of the Precursor race that now seeks only to dominate and assimilate all life in the galaxy so that it may complete its original goal, albeit in a very perverse way, that goal being to protect all life from extinction, by apparently assimilating it all instead. Gotta give them props, I suppose, for their dedication. A bunch of nosy humans eventually found the dust and started poking it and prodding it as humans do. They began using the dust to alter the genetics of their pets, to make them more docile and change aesthetic things such as their fur colour. Over time, this began to result in genetic mutations, which eventually presented as physical mutations. Bish bash bosh, the Flood soon begins jumping from lifeform to lifeform, all the while mutating and assimilating the life it found. The humans totally fucking botched the quarantine efforts, as hundreds of planets fell to the Flood, and they even turned on the Forerunners when the Flood found them. Despite these super intelligent beings being in control of everything, they lacked the wisdom to understand what was happening. They accused the humans of using the Flood as a tool for humanity to try and overthrow them, and so they resorted to fisticuffs. The humans were defeated, and as punishment, they were genetically devolved into cavemen and exiled to Earth. Bit of an overreaction in my opinion. No economic sanctions or anything like that. Nope, just straight up reversed millions of years of evolution and completely dissolved their entire history and empire. Factory settings restored. With humans out of the way, the Flood resumed its attack, now on the Forerunners, who were like, oh shit, the humans were right. Sadly, the Forerunners could no longer ask the humans for aid because the humans were now busy trying to work out how fucking fire worked. After years of war with ever more elaborate but ultimately futile attempts to contain the Flood, the Forerunners built the Halo Rings as a last resort. Their job was to annihilate all life from the galaxy. The idea was that the parasitic Flood needed a host with a nervous system in order to live and spread the plague. Therefore, if all neurological life was destroyed, the Flood would die out. The Forerunners managed to catalogue and save a bunch of species so that they may repopulate the galaxy after it was made barren, but while they did manage to activate the Halo Rings, destroying all life in the galaxy and ending the Flood threat, they kept samples of the flood for study. What? Seriously? You've just been pushed to the absolute brink of extinction, resulting in you having to annihilate all life in an entire galaxy, and you're keeping bits of the very thing that caused it. Now, I might have got an A in physics, but I'm no scientist, but I think that might be a bad idea. I'm sure it'll all be fine. But oh no, it wasn't fine, dear viewer, because thousands of years later, the war between the Covenant and humanity crash lands on one of the Halo rings that just happens to have the flood samples. The flood is released, and the same bullshit happens all over again. Shall we have a closer look at the flood? The flood is a virulent parasite. It starts off as a single cell that becomes an airborne spore. That spore is either inhaled or comes into direct contact with an appropriately intelligent life form, and the infection begins. Of course, it doesn't necessarily need to be a spore. I mean, if you trip and fall arse over tit into some flood goop, then you're fucked as well. The victim's bloodstream is pumped with flood cells that use their precursor shape-shifting abilities to mesh with the host cells and begin propagating more flood cells. The hosts will then mutate as the organs are dissolved to create new structures. The host's brain will be isolated from the rest of the body so that the flood can control the brain, but the brain cannot control the body. Also note that the new creature will take on the intelligence level of its host, so if it infects a marine pilot, then old Davy Jones over here now knows how to fly a spaceship. If a victim is killed by a flood creature as opposed to exposure to flood supercells, the creatures will favourably attack and inject supercells into the victim's spine as a quick way of breaching the nervous system. Thanks to the earlier mentioned way of controlling a victim's brain, the supercells will force a victim to break their own neck, ending the transformation process. Through various mutations and methods, the flood will gather enough biomass to create a proto-grave mind. A proto-grave mind can now begin to control the flood on a more basic level via telepathic communication. It will also mentally torture captive life forms in order to gather important information and reveal where more life forms can be found. A snowball effect begins now as more biomass is converted into flood hives that pump out more spores, terraforming the atmosphere of the planet and creating even more flood creatures. As part of the terraforming process, the flood will create blight lands. These operate as a sort of, like a base of operations for the flood as it begins to spread across whole planets. They are flood-infested areas designed to suck the life out of the planet, absorb solar energy, and consume all native life. The end result is a grave mind, an entity made from flood cells and thousands, millions of converted intelligent neural pathways that conjoin to create a super intelligence that acts as the brain of the flood. The grave mind can control the flood and even holds the intelligence of the original precursors that escaped the Forerunners' extermination attempts. The grave mind will now begin concocting ways to spread the flood throughout the galaxy and ultimately the universe to assimilate all life in its own fucked up way of pursuing the precursor's original goal. Right then, basic lore covered. Shall we check in with Mike? A hailstorm of gunfire ripped through a group of screaming Covenant grunts as they ran through a doorway. Luminescent blood spurted from severed limbs and ripped flesh, providing a macabre lighting to the otherwise dark room. A trio of armed men breached the doorway and observed the corpses. The team made sure they were dead and the room was clear before moving to the hallway. They followed the locator on their HUD. The rest of the group was just up ahead. Mike was anxious to regroup quickly. The trio turned into the room expecting to see their fellow soldiers. Instead, there were just puddles of blood, ripped clothing, and strewn about weapons. Mike quickly found a severed arm. Adorning the wrist was the tracker module from the task force commander. A pounding sound to their left revealed a door. The trio was stunned to see dents appearing in it, as if something was pushing hard from the other side. The door finally reached the limit of its structural integrity and the center burst open. Dozens of writhing infectopods with flailing tentacles and polyps came spilling in. They darted towards the trio and leapt into the air. Mike turned his weapon towards the horde and the three men opened fire. Their bullets shredded the creatures, showering everything in a foul yellowy green pus. More hordes began forcing their way into the room. The trio began retreating from the room, weapons still ablaze. Mike stopped to load a fresh magazine, but the pause was just enough for a swarm of pod infectors to envelop one of his friends. Several of the thing's tentacles penetrated through the man's armor and began grabbing his soft tissue and bones. The man's struggling immediately ceased as his nervous system was hijacked and his organs were pulped. Mike darted forwards to help, but the other surviving man dragged him backwards. As Mike turned to confront him, his friend was cut down by a burst of gunfire. Mike turned back in shock to see his former comrade, now a mutated, pulsating, inhuman-looking creature, pointing his assault rifle in the direction of the dead man. It then turned towards Mike, who dived backwards, narrowly missing a burst of gunfire before cutting the creature down with a burst of his own. A crash from behind him revealed what he assumed to previously be Covenant elites and jackals breaking through the door, all spouting various sickly growths and appendages. Mike flipped onto his stomach and emptied his magazine into the group. Limbs were cut away and growths exploded into green pus, but the group kept coming. He stood, reloaded, and charged at them. Another burst of gunfire took down a couple more. A well-timed kick sent several infectors hurtling away, but it was to no avail. There were too many of them. A bulbous creature appeared from the darkness and crept up behind Mike and exploded. He was showered with infectopods. Mike dropped to the floor and began rolling to try and get the creatures off, but it was too late. The creatures began shooting corrupted precursor cells into his bloodstream that quickly began liquefying his organs and reshaping his body. His bones bent and reshaped while new fleshy growths began to contort around them. Elongated calcium structures splintered from his arms into razor-sharp bone claws. His chest split and his face and head were forced backwards and sideways so they were hanging off uselessly, while pink polyps sprouted from the hole in his ribcage, ripe with more spores for infecting others. The new creature stood uneasily, adjusting to its new form. It called on the previous man's training, this Mike. It clumsily picked up the rifle at its feet and slotted in a new magazine. A swift neural journey revealed intelligence on how to fly a ship, how to drive a vehicle as well. The Flood would use this information well. It would go and find a warthog or a pelican, and together they would find more like Mike. And those two would join them. They would all be one. All life would become the Flood. Check out this video for another great story, and be sure to leave a like if you made it this far. It really helps the channel. Big up the patrons, and special thanks to Andre Bashert, Silly Goose, Ryan Brenner, Infinite Tune, and Viger.